All right, so a small reset. Actually, the story of this is funny because my computer was hacked. It was a small virus that did not allow me to go on any browser. So essentially, I had to reinstall everything. And when I reinstalled everything, all the settings that were wonderfully and painfully created have disappeared. So I'm essentially like a baby learning to play again. So welcome everyone. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I want to thank Rohan at the beginning of this introduction and at the end as well. So indeed, there is a reproducibility and replicability crisis in science. This is not news or not recent news. It's big news, but it's not recent news. You can see here some headlines from obviously Nature and Science were very concerned about this, but you also can see things like an article in the Atlantic, and even one of our own statisticians, Andrew Gelman, writing in New York Times about the replicability in science in New York Times. So that's a huge visibility strike for statisticians who for many years were not exactly in the limelight. So I thought it's a good, appropriate thing for an introduction to such a workshop to fix a little bit the terminology. So this is something that came up from National Academy of Sciences reports on reproducibility and replicability. So, and these two words are actually now understood to mean different things in science, even if we may use them interchangeably in our personal lives. So reproducibility is now associated with computational reproducibility. So in layman terms, or in brief terms, you could say that the same algorithms or methods applied to the same data should yield the same results. Now, this is, you may be surprised that this is even an issue. Then that this is, in some sense, this is not, I'm giving you new data and I ask you to replicate my findings. I'm saying, okay, I have produced an algorithms, I have a set of data, I give you my algorithm to apply to the same data, and I expect you to obtain the same results that I did. This sounds like minimal requirement for any kind of self-respecting scientist. And yet, even this simple requirement can fail. And there's plenty of evidence for that. And you can see how it could fail, right? So if, for instance, data is not available, or I give you a privatized version of my data, there is a lack of algorithmic transparency. Of course, there's also silly mistakes, like the random seed of your simulation algorithm is not communicated, and then you start running the algorithm with a different random seed, the results would be slightly different, things of that nature. And a recent magazine that has been started by people at Harvard, it's called Harvard Data Science Review, has devoted an entire issue to computational reproducibility and scientific replicability. So scientific replicability is, I think, what I suspect you'll hear most of the talks today about. And Xiaoli Meng's editorial in that issue says that if CR is hard, SR is NP hard. I mean, this is a sobering statement. You all know that NP hard problems are really, really hard. So essentially what we're talking about here is that if two studies were to satisfy replicability, they would have to obtain consistent results given the level of uncertainty in the system. And this is exactly the type of stories that have made the cover of New York Times or Science or Nature and so on. So essentially, you have a team of people going out there, collecting data and identifying some interesting effects. And another team goes out in the field, collects a different set of data, and they look for the same effects, and they are simply not there. So obviously, there's many reasons for this to happen, and that's why the problem is so hard. It's obvious reasons are variations in data quality, modeling strategies. Nothing says that these people will use the same models, and also, not to be underestimated, the expertise of the team. Like if you have someone out there knowing only parametric statistics, their results will be likely different from people who know a lot more methodological strategies. Now, these are pretty standard things, and of course, I'm not talking here about malicious researchers. I mean, that's a different category, and we should not concern with it. There's nothing we can do as scientists to fix that, except maybe reveal their unethical behavior and then let justice system take over. But we're talking about people who are fair and honest, and they have the best interest at heart, and yet they fail to produce replicable results. Now, additional challenges. If you think, I take here the big picture approach. You can think of statistics as still a relatively new science with protocols and workflows that vary across groups. First team may be a Bayesian team. The second team is a frequentist team. There is a large body of literature looking at harmonizing another species, if you want, of fiducial statisticians. So all these efforts are well recognized, and it's still ongoing, and they will lead to differences in inference. You can think of simpler differences, as I mentioned before, parametric statistic versus non-parametric. But even standard methods can yield surprises. And this is a good time to plug in my own work in this area with Professor Lei Sun in the Department of Statistical Science at the University of Toronto, and a former student, Li Jianshu. We looked at Wiener's curves in regression settings. So these are settings that everybody understands very well. And the simple thing we did differently here, we simply, and those familiar with Wiener's curves will know very well what I'm talking about. We simply revert estimation and testing. We simply first test whether an effect is significant, and then we report the estimate of that effect. And it's not difficult to show that such estimates will be biased, and with an upward bias in the case of the problem we looked at. But what's less clear is how to correct for such things. And it's, again, something that people are still working on. I guess my story here from that example is that even small tweaks can lead to significant differences. If you think about other situations, you can think of how would we adjust for unorthodox sampling designs. Selection bias, if you want, in your design. Choosing, how do you choose the parameters for algorithm implementations? For the Bayesians out there, imagine the burn-in parameter or the length of the MCMC chain. That's something to more familiar with. So simple things like that can actually lead to big differences. But now we're living in a time with large data and complex structures, and that are animated by, or populated by hundreds, if not thousands, of parameters. You can imagine that for such a thing, the results are much more difficult to replicate, because once you have, even if you have large data, again, by big data, we like to think that they are data ID and so on, but they're often not. And in fact, what looks like big data may not be big data. But leaving that aside, when you have so many parameters, you look at low power, lack of robustness. When the model is so complex, it's very hard to actually identify or make sure that the robustness is there. And if we move even further, we're moving into the realm of black box type models for which maybe we develop an ABC algorithm or some other variational Bayes methods. Our ability to understand the source of any inflated estimates, or like in the winner's curse regression model or spurious significance, is even more restricted. So I'm sorry if I sound a little bit pessimistic, but I want to say that at the end of the day, we don't want to lose hope, right? I mean, this is what makes our life interesting, these kind of problems. And I want to say that for statisticians or data scientists, the recent focus on the role of statistics in R&R is not just bad news. Right? Our methods are getting attention also because they matter. People realize that what we do makes a difference in their analysis. And I reading through Science and Nature and so on, the word statistics appears more and more. And I just mentioned that a statistician worked for New York Times. So that's a huge coup for our discipline, and it brings a lot of attention to our methods, and we should welcome that. And I think there is real progress being made. I mean, for instance, establishing workflows for a research community or a research domain can go a long way to remove some of these obstacles towards replicability. Think about setting up a prior or setting up the computational algorithm, how set up some rules that are general enough for that community, and people will be more likely to respect them. Obviously, we're seeing a world in which there's more and more push to share data, to share the models and software packages for statistical methods. As statisticians, I think we should help understand others, understand and embrace our collaborators, especially who are not necessarily statisticians or data scientists. We should help them understand and embrace fundamental statistical principles. This will go a long way to remove some of the replicability and reproducibility issues. And to finish on a even more positive note, I would say that many see failure to replicate as an incentive. If you think about science, the history of science is filled with stories of lack of reproducibility that led to advances. And a famous quote by Isaac Asimov is, the most exciting phrase to hear in science, the one that heralds new discoveries, is not eureka, but hey, that's funny. So I want to thank Rohan for organizing an exciting and timely workshop. I'm looking forward to hearing many incredibly stimulating talks, and that's all for me. Thanks.